Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the webinar, Best Practices for Employers, Guiding Your Employees Through their Stimulus Payments and Through Savings. We will be starting shortly. In the meantime, we're about to put up a few questions on the screen. We'd appreciate if you'd fill them out so we have a better sense of who's on the call. So the first one is, what's your industry? So we're looking for the options: financial services, public sector, retail, hospitality, healthcare, and nonprofit. Or if there's another, let us know and enter it into the chat. We ask these questions so that we can have them inform our answers, or the panelists can have them inform their answers later on. This is really helpful for us. Great, so we're getting some answers in. Thank you all for doing that. Looks like about half financial services, about a little over a third healthcare and nonprofit. We see some folks from the public sector, retail, hospitality, and folks from other industries as well. Great, so we're on to the second question, and this one is, what is the size of your U.S. workforce? So we're looking for how many employees you have in the U.S. So we've got under 1,000, between 1,000 and 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, and 10,000 to 25,000 or over. Great, so we're getting some results in. Thank you again for taking the time. We have, looks like most of the folks here have under 1,000, but we've got a few businesses over 25,000 and some in the 1,000 to 5,000 range. That's great to know, and our panelists will keep that in mind. Great. And the final opening question before we officially kick off the webinar is, are you considering changing your benefits package due to COVID-19? So there are a variety of answers there. Again, we greatly appreciate sort of starting off this way. It really helps us formulate questions tailored to our audience. And the results are coming in. It looks like folks are at different stages. And it looks like most people are not considering changing their benefits package due to COVID-19, but there are some who are considering it or at various stages. So it looks like the most frequent answer was no, but we have a pretty even spread of folks in the other questions. Great. Well, thanks for taking the time to do that. And again, thank you all for joining us. We know that this is a busy time and that there are a lot of things to do. But thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Ewas. I'm a senior policy manager at Commonwealth, and I'll be moderating the panel today. Just wanted to cover a few things before we jump into the panel. Again, the title for those who are just joining is Best Practices for Employers, Guiding Your Employees Through Stimulus Payments and Through Savings. And just wanted to let you know that if you're tweeting this webinar, please be sure to use hashtag COVID Financial Impact. So one word, hashtag COVID Financial Impact, to join the conversation. We will be live tweeting throughout, and we look forward to having you join our conversation. So I want to do a brief run through of the agenda. So we started with the audience poll. Thank you for those who did that, and welcome to those who are joining. I'll briefly introduce the panel. We'll do a little housekeeping. We'll do another quick audience poll, and then we will, as quickly as possible, go into the panel discussion to really learn from the expertise of our panel. And we're really excited to have that start. And so some of you who are listening may have joined us for the previous webinar focused on BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative, or coming out of BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative. We had one on March 26th. If you're joining us again, thank you for joining us again. If you're new, welcome. The goal of this one is to really think about practical tools and ways that employers can implement practical strategies for employees to take full advantage of their stimulus payments, right? And any future payments, you don't know what the future holds, but this is really a critical moment, and employers have an important role to play. And so just to give you a sense of the experts we'll be hearing from in the panel discussion, we'll do the introduction. I'll do a brief introduction to them. You can read their profiles if you want the full introduction. So we have Timothy Fleck, who's the executive director and co-founder of Commonwealth, which is a mission-driven organization that builds solutions to make people financially secure. We also have Matt Ball, who is the vice president and head of workplace financial health at the Financial Health Network. And we have Mariel Beasley, who is a principal at the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University and co-director of the Common Sense Lab. So these folks all work together on BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative and bring different perspectives and expertise to this question. Before we dive in, just wanted to ground the work quickly. As we all know, Congress passed and the president signed the largest economic stimulus package in American history into law late last month. And the reason we're here is that a key part of that was the direct stimulus payments, $1,200 for an individual, more for families, depending on size and income. That's a key part of it. And really, before we dive into the details of the discussion, just wanted to ground it in how important a small cash infusion, liquid savings can be for many folks. For some people and employees, that may mean the opportunity to pay down credit card debt or save a little bit if they're still employed and their family is healthy. For others, it might be a vital infusion, right, at a critical time. And sort of Commonwealth research, other independent research, my professional experience as the director of the Economic Mobility Lab in the Mayor's Office of the City of Boston, and my personal experience growing up in a low-income family sort of has shown me this fact, right, that a small amount of cash can make a huge difference. And sort of recognizing that, how true that is, how true that can be for certain families. Employers have an important role in making sure their employees do the best that they can and have all the tools they need to make the most out of the money they receive and any future money that they may receive. So with that said, we just have one piece of housekeeping. You'll be able to ask us questions. So many of you submitted questions beforehand, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar, some of them. And during the webinar, you can also ask questions. So we'll do our best to incorporate your feedback and address your concerns during the webinar. But if we're unable to do that in the follow-up, there'll be a live recording and other ways that we can follow through and follow up. We will do our best to do that. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to send questions. Don't hesitate to send them if you have them. And now we are going to transition to one more audience poll. Again, just before we bring our panelists on to talk, just to give us a sense of who is on the call and the types of questions that you're looking to address. So we'll spend about 30 seconds on each. The first one is, have you ever leveraged your commercial bank to get access for your employees to low or no fee checking or savings account? Yes, no, or unsure. So we'll keep this up for about 30 seconds. And then I'll report on the answers as soon as we get a significant amount in. And we get some answers in. It looks like the majority say that they have not at the moment. Several say yes, and many are unsure. So that gives us a good baseline for this conversation on offering low, no fee checking and savings accounts. The next question, what types of programs do you offer, if any, to help your employees manage their paychecks? And please select all that apply. So we have direct deposit with split deposit, prepaid cards, instant pay access, or anything else. So again, we really appreciate this, and this is helpful for our panelists and for us as we learn about the perspectives that you bring and sort of understand the foundation of where we are for the discussion. So it looks like about 3/4 offer direct deposit, a little over 60% direct deposit with split deposit, and then a smaller smattering on prepaid cards and instant pay access. That's very helpful, thank you. And then one more before we get to our stellar panel. Is your company sending communications to employees on the stimulus package in particular? So please select one, yes, that you already have, yes, you plan to, no, you haven't, or you're unsure. So it's over half already have, a little bit plan to, 30% haven't, 13% are unsure. So that's pretty even split. Most have, but many haven't yet or are unsure. So that is great to know, and thank you for participating. That's very helpful for us and for the panel. And so without further ado, we're going to spend the next 20 to 25 minutes asking questions of our all-star panel. And so I will start with Marielle from Common Sense Lab. Marielle, one of the things that stood out to me about the CARES Act was the waiver for typical penalties for withdrawing from retirement savings. So it's there to encourage, the penalty is there to encourage longer term savings, discourage taking it out before retirement, but obviously this is a crisis and that was waived. From your perspective, I'm thinking about what insights from behavioral science employers can keep in mind as they provide guidance to employees about accessing their retirement savings in particular.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question. Thanks for having me here and all of that. But there's a few things that really kind of stand out around this sort of inclusion in the COVID CARES Act. One is obviously if people have funds, and this is sort of a crisis, it's nice for them to be able to use it. But a couple, I want to kind of highlight a couple of behavioral principles that might actually potentially make this encourage people to actually make not the most optimal decision for themselves around this particular piece of the CARES Act. One is framing, right? So framing is an incredibly powerful thing in behavioral science, and small changes to messaging or the way something is framed can really sort of change our understanding and perception of sort of that product, that advice, that action, anything like that. So the framing in specifically for this piece is that it's framed as you can make a withdrawal without penalty. And sure, yes, it is. You don't have that standard 10% withdrawal penalty. However, it sort of neglects the fact that actually withdrawing from investment accounts during a down market is inherently a penalty in itself. And so while, yes, they don't have the 10% withdrawal penalty, that essentially what you are doing, however, is paying a 30% penalty if you are withdrawing when the market is down significantly. And so I think that's just an important thing to realize, is that by saying that that it's withdrawing without penalty, it's almost sort of obfuscating the fact that actually there's a huge penalty to pay to withdraw right now, and you might actually be better off looking at other options and making sure that this really is a last resort. The second thing is a behavioral science principle called the wealth illusion. And this is the idea that when we have sort of larger sums of money, we sort of feel like even that a small chunk of that feels like a small amount, even if on its own, it actually is a lot. And so if you have, $75,000 in an investment account, you look at that and you say, well, if I take out $25,000, I'd still have $50,000. And so it still feels like you have a lot in there. Whereas if instead you said, do you need $25,000 for, the next few months to get through this and figure it out? People would say, I could probably get by on less than that. But because it's sort of attached to this larger lump sum, there's a possibility that people might actually raid more in this moment than what they really need, which could really have detrimental effects on their actual, retirement savings down the line. So that's sort of a second principle. The third principle is, of course, just on anchoring and opportunity costs, is that when people pull some of that money in and they're using it, if they really are sort of saying, well, what do I think I might need, and make sure that I'm protected for what I might need, and they maybe pull out a little extra to be sure, what we then know is that when we sort of have a little bit extra in our account, we have a harder time thinking about the opportunity costs around spend. And so we might be a little bit more likely to spend more than we actually wanted to on different things. And it really kind of sets you up for some things that might get you into trouble at the sort of cost of your future self. So the three things that I would say to make sure that you're doing as an employer, communicating to your employees about this benefit, or this this ability within the CARES Act to withdraw without penalty, is just make sure that you are not framing this as without penalty, that you actually are communicating that while those penalty fees are waived, it is expensive to withdraw from stocks in a down market, and there are opportunity costs involved in that. The second one is making sure that you're encouraging people to think about the bare minimum of what they need over the next month, rather than thinking about how much they could pull out from their retirement savings. So really trying to start from the bottom up and say, how much do you need this month? How much would you maybe need in the second month? Rather than starting from, this is how much you have available, how much you want to take out of it. And then the third thing is actually even encouraging employees and letting employees know that they can always come back and take out more if they need it later, to get them to take smaller amounts more frequently, rather than sort of trying to estimate how much they'll need and wanting to sort of overestimate to just make sure that they don't have to come back in again and take more, and just emphasizing to your employees that it might be better for them to take those smaller amounts more frequent to help sort of stretch that money a little bit longer and really help protect and safeguard that future self.
Great, Marielle. That sounds like really great practical advice. And so Tim, from Commonwealth, thinking about retirement savings, many employers offer retirement savings plans, are familiar with them, but they may be less familiar with enabling emergency savings. So my question for you is, are retirement plan providers relevant to short-term savings, and can they help employers offer quality emergency savings opportunities to workers?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And just to say again, thank you all for spending some time with us today. I think this builds nicely from the last comments from Marielle. One of the things that we've really learned a lot in the last, say 10 years is how much the long term is connected to the short term. And so that comes up when we think about the role that retirement providers might be able to play in the workplace as we think about the short term. And we've seen a lot of evidence that retirement plan providers, they understand this now and they are thinking about it. So a message I wanted to make sure comes up in this conversation today is, might have been 5 years ago, it wouldn't have felt very productive to reach out to your retirement provider or your record keeper and say, I'm thinking about how I help my workforce be ready for, for the day in and the day out. I think you'll find now a lot more receptivity. Obviously, that varies by the particular provider. I would say, as a sidebar, we would think it would be very helpful if the providers hear those questions more from employers and from benefits professionals. So I would encourage you, as an act of public service, to ask them those questions. And the reason I think that you might want to consider this is that there's a real value in the existing infrastructure of the retirement system, including the fact that you already have a vendor relationship with that retirement provider. And we've heard from working with companies that sometimes the mere process of deciding if you would want to establish a relationship with a new vendor who offers a short-term savings solution is a real impediment, and there can be some real benefit of being able to turn to somebody that you already know and have a business relationship with. And from the point of view of your workers, this might seem obvious, but it's significant that they're already conditioned to think of savings connected to that retirement conversation and that retirement vendor. And many of us, we have a lot of things in our mind other than financial services or savings. It may be all we think is, oh yeah, retirements, that's in the savings bucket, it's in my head. So we should build from that fact and be able to attend to their short-term needs and their long-term needs through that same part of their brain that's connected to savings. And the last thing I wanted to say is that because there's so much history and frankly, public policy and industry attention on retirement savings, there are tangible things that we have learned from that can be brought to bear on short-term savings. And the one that we've been thinking a lot about, and certainly others have, is the lessons of automatic enrollment and automatic contributions which have really revolutionized workplace retirement savings. We're very interested in testing that for short-term savings. And so there's a little bit of an advertisement here, if that sounds like something that you might be interested in for your workforce, to know that we have resources to test that idea and are working on lining up the appropriate regulatory permissions. So we're looking for folks who are interested in that.
Great, thanks, Tim. And I just heard strongly the themes of short-term and long-term, right? That we need to address the stimulus payments now, but we can set up systems for longer term and the short-term and long-term, both in emergency savings connected to retirement. So that was great. Matt, sort of building on that, from your perspective, what are some practical steps that HR or workplace leaders should be thinking about to help their workers make the most of the stimulus payments in particular? And are there examples in your network, folks partnering with fintechs or with banks for that particular purpose?
Yeah, well, thank you all for having us here and to speak to some of these important topics. I think Mariel and Tim highlighted, I think, two important practical steps that employers can, and sounds like some on this call are taking. One is around how do you communicate what's happening now in this moment to your workforce and what their options are, and the power of that communication. I think even on the best of days, employees, when there's not a crisis, are not particularly engaged with communications. So I think there's a real opportunity now to help really provide additional value, not just in terms of highlighting what the programs are, but leveraging some of Mariel's insights to help employees think about how they may want to prioritize which buckets they tap into and when. I think that's particularly true if you think about the range of workplace benefits that may be available, whether it's a hardship fund, whether it's access to PTO, whether it's access to other pockets of money that may be able to be accessed prior to going into a retirement plan for all of the reasons that Mariel highlighted. So I think understanding how do you actually help employees think about decision trees in this moment is really, really important. I think there are some fintechs and organizations that can be useful in that, particularly around the notion of financial coaching or financial navigation. And through the Financial Health Network, we have some publications on our website that can highlight what both our members are doing, but what others have done in terms of how do you leverage maybe a coaching service that's in place as an additional resource. I think that's particularly relevant for HR professionals, because if you're like every other professional or every other worker, you've got a lot going on in your life. And the ability to be as responsive as you'd want to be to your workforce may be impacted. And so leveraging some of these additional solutions that are in the market that are extremely cost effective may be a way to actually provide that support. To Tim's point around innovation, particularly around whether it's benefit plan design, I think this is a really important moment for the retirement space in particular, for a couple of reasons. Number one, there has been some early innovation around creating so-called sidecar savings accounts that allow individuals to put after-tax contributions into that. But I think you're also seeing opportunities with other record keepers to think about maybe even out-of-plan solutions that could be used. It's not uncommon to see health savings accounts directly linked to the retirement plans, as it's recognized as a savings vehicle for healthcare costs. I think thinking about possible innovation relative to savings accounts that are not necessarily tied to direct contributions is another way to think about it. And there's a couple of reasons why that may be an interesting innovation to poke at. Number one is, if you were leveraging after-tax contributions now, the moment in which you need to access those, they may be subject to market volatility. And so is it serving as the appropriate vehicle for savings, or is there an alternative way or an alternative investment strategy to leverage for in-plans? In addition to this, I think they're seeing a lot of fintechs that are really stepping up to the plate and providing innovative ways to help workers save, both through direct paychecks, but also through other spending behaviors. Some of these are rooted in the direct-to-consumer framework, but I think there's a number of other fintechs that are starting to partner with workplaces, and we've seen this in our own network to help provide solutions. So organizations like Digit, organizations like Capital, organizations like SaverLife, which is formerly Earn, are doing some really important work right now about how do you help bring these solutions into the workplace as a way to help workers in this really pivotal moment.
Great. Thank you for that, Matt. I think it was great for us to start with all of those were very concrete. There were some tangible action items for employers. And I think that's right, given the severity of the crisis. The need for action is apparent, but Also, the three organizations here are currently leading efforts of BlackRock's emergency savings initiative. So I've got a kind of a big picture free-for-all question, so you all can figure out what order you want to go in. But the question is, how do you think about savings in general in this current moment?
I'm happy to go first, and that way I get to say without having to think about whether or not you guys are going to say the same thing. It's great. So I think first, the way that we're thinking about savings, the way that I and some of the folks here at Common Sense are thinking about savings is the fact that it's, first of all, there's been this great kind of things that I've been hearing out there around that we're not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm, but we have different boats. And so this, I think, is really, really important to remember that while there are definitely segments of the population that have been hit hard and they are really thinking about, and they have already been hit hard, and they are really just thinking about how do they put food on the table and how do they make sure that they keep their lights on and whatnot. There's also a sizable portion of the population that maybe has some reduced earnings coming into their household or into their into their own particular income stream, but essentially they are still having some income coming in. They don't know how long that will last for, and they are, and this is actually an incredible moment where it's extremely salient. Emergency savings in particular is very top of mind because people are very much thinking about this uncertain future and how do they protect themselves in this space. And so, and I think like we're seeing evidence of that. So Matt mentioned Capital. We do some work with Capital, and for example, as Capital has seen sort of tracking actually with the increase in the news of COVID-19, that they've actually seen an increase of new users setting emergency savings as their savings goal. So, and significantly, so from like 2.5% of new users setting emergency savings as their savings goal coming in, now up to 15% of new users are setting that as their goal. That's a huge increase because this emergency savings is incredibly salient. People are recognizing it as important, and people are actually proactively taking steps right now to start building savings. And I think what's happening also as we think about savings is that we really are thinking about savings as a cash flow tool. And it's really about, it's not about this is the money that I spend and this is the money that I never touch. It's really about the liquidity of savings and saying this is the money that is for today, and savings is the money that is for maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe 2 months from now. And so I think it's really about looking at savings in sort of sometimes even a micro time frame, not even, maybe longer than what we even shorter than what we normally think of as short term. And I think we're going to see this sort of high liquidity where people are saving, spending from their savings, and continuing to save, all sort of in this same process and in the same cycle.
Maybe I'll just amplify a couple of things that I thought that was fabulous, Marielle. And one thing that we've just seen over and over again across the years is that you don't really have to persuade people that saving is a smart thing to do. Most of us, we know that, right? We know that we wish we were healthier. We know that we wish we ate better, and we wish that we had savings. So I mentioned that because, as I think Matt has already said, we know that most of you out there are incredibly busy right now, and you want to spend your time on the things that are going to matter to your people. And this is one where, as Marielle said so well, there's all kinds of evidence that when the economy goes south, people naturally think more about saving. So you have an opportunity as employers to speak to what is already on people's minds. And that seems significant both in the message, right? There's no you should, there's no finger wagging. It's like, we're here to help you do what we expect you're probably already thinking about. And the substance, like that should be the frame. What are the real tangible things that your people need to be able to build up some savings? And I love the way Marielle framed it. I think this is exactly right. Sometimes that word takes on a grandeur that's totally not appropriate right now. But what it is about is anytime you've got some income, you don't have to spend, today or tomorrow. Like, let's make sure you're putting it somewhere so you have it to manage, because we all know, that we're much more concerned about what comes next week and next month and over the next year than we were even 6 or 8 weeks ago. So what does that translate to in terms of practical things? I would offer 2, maybe 2.5. Number one, we started the webinar with a slide about whether or not your organization offers direct deposit and split direct deposit, and I think the figure was 62%. That's not a surprise. We see that a lot. If we had a figure around how many of your workers know about and are using that split deposit capability, my guess is it would be very, very much lower. So make sure people know that that sort of fairly basic tool is available. You know, you can sign up to have a few bucks or a certain percentage of every single paycheck start its life in your savings account. And if it's a liquid account, you know, you can always go and grab it if you need to. The second thing is, and this will depend on your workforce population, but it's a truism, if you don't have a place to save, you're not going to save. And so think carefully about how many of your folks might just not have a savings account or a decent product. And you may have a clue if you go and look at who's on direct deposit. It's not the same question precisely, but it's probably not that hard to go talk to your, your payroll colleagues or your payroll vendor and say, what fraction of our folks are actually getting paid in checks? And those might be the ones to start with and say, would it be helpful if we could hook you up with a credit union or a bank or a fintech that can offer that for you? So I would really encourage that. And then the last point is that simply talking about this sends a message that you get it, you understand that your workers are thinking about what comes tomorrow, and I think that has real value, and it normalizes the behavior, right? We all know that nobody likes to talk about personal finances. There's, anecdotes and research that suggests we'll talk about much more intimate parts of our life more freely than our financial lives. So you have an opportunity as an employer in terms of the messages you put out on your intranet, in terms of the the posters in the break room, in terms of the emails you send out, however you communicate with your people. It's a sort of recurring message around saving. Here's what we can do. Here's how we're thinking about it. How can we help? This would be my.
There's very little to add to what Tim and Mariel had said, because I think they summarized it nicely. Just a couple of quick points. Number one is, I think emerging out of this, I think to Mariel's point and Tim's point, we are going to see emergency savings being a very common discussion point, both for employees who are coming back into the workforce and those longer term who are thinking about which employers they want to work for. And so even from a competitive perspective, being able to attract and retain the types of talent, I think we're going to see emergency savings emerge as one of those benefits. Not just is it offered, but is my employer helping me do it? And if so, how are they helping me do it? And what does that ultimately look like?
Great. Well, thank you all. I hope everyone is learning as much and enjoying it as much as I am. And I hope you like polls, because we have a roughly midpoint audience poll question that we're going to want to send out before we ask the panelists a few more questions. So that will be up in just a second. Here it is. Has your firm taken steps to encourage workers to build emergency savings? It's like yes, no, but you're planning to, or you're unsure. And we'll get back in 30 or so seconds on responses. Great, and we get the responses in. So has your firm taken steps to encourage workers to build emergency savings? 34% said yes, 45% said no, 11% said no but planning to, and 11% are unsure. So pretty even mix across the board. That's great for us to know, and seems like there's great work to build on, and a lot to learn from the discussion. So thank you all again for joining and for filling out the poll, and we'll dive right into ask a few more questions, and then we'll transition for 15 minutes or so for some audience questions, and then we'll wrap up. So the first question is for Tim. Tim, under the CARES Act, certain federal student loans have automatically been placed in forbearance. I personally knew this because I follow the news, and mine were placed in forbearance. And some federally backed mortgages also offer forbearance. Is this something employers should pay attention to? And if so, how?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'm also glad this is coming up, because I think this gets lost sometimes in conversations about household financial well-being. And just to level set, I think probably most of us realize this, but consumer debt is a huge issue in American life, and much more so sort of regular working people. There's a lot of evidence on this. We did some work recently where we were out talking to lower wage workers, and what we found was 55% told us they had credit card debt, 31% auto debt, student loans almost 29%, medical debt 25%. So the first point on this is that I think employers have a real opportunity to gain some appreciation by even talking about debt, because it's so unexpected, and it can be a really overwhelming experience to be carrying around debt. The second thing I wanted to say is that we've had some very small sample but very recent research that suggests just in the last 4 weeks, workers may actually be increasing their debt payments. And I don't think we know yet if that's a good thing or not a good thing, or it may vary by by the individual situation. Almost certainly does. But I think it underscores this point that debt is occupying a lot of headspace on the part of workers. And so the reason that I mentioned that is I think there is an opportunity for you all as HR professionals to, as I say, acknowledge the issue and then offer some, not really advice, but just sort of common sense information. What's powerful about the CARES Act, I think, is it reminds us that this is a moment when some debt holders are being more flexible or are open to conversations about repayment terms. Obviously, not everyone is going to automatically put a debt into forbearance the way the federal student loans have, but it opens up a conversation. And I think you can helpfully remind your workforce that being in touch with your lenders is a sensible thing to do as a general rule. And the other thing to consider there is that when you have a forbearance opportunity, that creates some slack potentially. Many folks have all kinds of demands on that slack, but to encourage a sort of deliberate process about what to do with that. The decision about whether you pay down fixed debt or whether you put that into paying off a credit card that's liquid debt, or whether you put those same funds into savings will have implications, even weeks away in terms of whether you have access to funds that you need to manage day in and day out. So I would just, think about is that a message that you can send out, stopping short of telling people what to do, but encouraging them to think about this. And I guess I'll end with 2 practical notes. We have heard that a number of employee assistance programs are equipped to field these kinds of questions. So if you get understandably concerned about where is the line, about what sort of messages you can deliver, perhaps one safe message is, this is in scope for our EAP if you offer one, and to just simply make that statement, I think, can be adding some real value. The second thing we've observed is that many of your commercial banking relationships are probably putting out content related to financial topics, and they may have resources that would be another easy way for you not to be in the position of providing kind of one-on-one counseling, which we know employers are not necessarily set up to do, but to refer your workers to a responsible, qualified resource who can help them through some of these questions. So those are some thoughts on the debt issue. I think it's on the minds of your workers almost certainly.
Great, thanks, Tim. And Matt, as Tim was saying that, I was thinking about some of the previous thoughts you had and sort of what your thinking was on how employers are thinking sort of more generally about the future of workplace emergency savings programs. Touched on a little bit, but just sort of circling back.
Yeah, so I think there's going to continue to be innovation around retirement plans in particular, because it's already an established savings mechanism. So I would absolutely continue to expect that to happen. I think more innovations around how do you help people think through defaults with regards to payroll splitting is going to be an important conversation. Now, there's some state-based regulatory challenges that make that really challenging, but I think this is a moment where those conversations are really salient. The other thing I anticipate is going into the rest of this year, but certainly going into 2021, workplaces are going to continue to sort of evaluate the ability for them to contribute new dollars towards benefits. And so maintaining existing benefit structures, I think, is going to be a priority, and where possible, expanding that. So I think it's important that, given the importance of emergency savings is taking it, what are some tactics that employers may be able to use to leverage existing benefit dollars to actually fuel and fund potential emergency savings? So just a couple of ideas, and this is actually part of a blog that was released today through the BlackRock Emergency Savings Initiative. It's focused on maybe looking at PTO balances. In normal years, most Americans that have PTO balances leave a lot of dollars on the table. Sometimes those can be carried forward to the prior year. Sometimes they are automatically forfeited. And so thinking about opportunities to take these already accrued and earned cash value days, and can you redirect those towards a savings vehicle? PTO cash outs are not uncommon in the workplace. And so how do you think about maybe getting more prescriptive with where you can direct excess PTO balances on a year-over-year basis? We should absolutely encourage people to take time off. It is just as important as anything else we could all do, but it's just not the reality for most folks in the workplace. So how do you leverage those existing spends in a way that doesn't add new dollars, but supports a really valuable benefit? Another opportunity is to think about your overall wellness programs, particularly wellness incentives. There's research out there that talks about the employer that offers a wellness-based incentive, about 86% of them have some sort of cash value associated with that. That cash value is usually in terms of reduced or changed premiums for healthcare, but also some flat cash payments and cash-based incentives. And so since financial health and financial wellness is usually part of broader wellness programs, is there opportunities to be more prescriptive and give people the option to direct those cash payments into savings vehicles? So again, not adding additional dollar to the benefit spend, but using your existing infrastructure and benefit strategy to actually support the growth of savings programs. And I think that's important because I know the work that Mariel's done and lots of others that are thinking about it from a behavioral perspective know that employers that both incent but also contribute is a way to increase participation and utilization of these programs.
Great, thanks so much for that. I think now we're with about 12 minutes left, we'll transition to the audience Q&As, and we've done our best to sort of combine questions. We'll call out folks where we can, but some of you asked a lot of similar questions, which is good. But we'll start this one with Mariel. You know, recognizing how prevalent financial insecurity was before COVID-19, right? As many as 6 in 10 employees in America reported living paycheck to paycheck before COVID-19. And with the unemployment numbers growing, we saw some today, you know, there might have already been a scarcity mindset, right? Sort of a concern about lack of resources, but now that will only grow. So I was thinking about that in terms of behavioral science. What is the scarcity mindset? And how can employers use behavioral science to help employees who may be experiencing it now? And a lot of folks touched on this topic, but this framing really was in Mariel's expertise.
Yeah, so that's a great note. And for those of you who are less familiar with sort of the scarcity mindset, this has really been helped kind of developed and fleshed out by Mani Shafir and Mullainathan, or some researchers in sort of behavioral and decision sciences. And essentially what they have found is that there are real consequences to our cognitive functioning, like when we are operating under scarce resources. And that is very real, it's measurable, and it's impactful. And those are things like you have lower cognitive control when you're operating under scarcity. And lower cognitive control is like your self-control regulation. And that means that it's really a lot harder for you to follow through on your intentions. It's harder for you to take that moment and sort of check yourself to be like, wait a second, do I really need to do this, or do I really want to do that? And you know, it's what we use to sort of hold our tempers back instead of snapping at our friends and family when we're stressed. That is all part of that sort of self-control regulation. And when you're operating under scarce resources, you just don't have that. It's dramatically reduced. Similarly is sort of this concept of tunneling. And this is the idea that, you know, tunnel vision is when you're operating under scarce resources, your brain naturally tunnels in on that resource. And you're really sort of, you essentially only focus on that emergency of sort of trying to get more of that resource. And that means it's often to the detriment of anything that is outside of that tunnel. You just don't have the sort of the brain power to put towards it. And that's going to be really, really crucial as an employer, knowing that your employees are going through this. And it's also just going to be incredibly crucial just knowing that folks are under an incredible amount of stress. Even if they're, you know, even if maybe their salary is stable, it might be that they have a, you know, another partner in the household whose finances are at. Maybe they have a child who's having to move back in, and additional costs because, you know, they have been let go. So there's a lot of like, it's likely that a household is experiencing some scarcity. And the way that they've sort of measured this is that operating under scarcity is essentially equivalent to operating as if you didn't sleep at all the night before. But that is every day. And so thinking about like just how do you feel and how do you navigate the world when you haven't slept at all the night before that is how people who are sort of in this scarcity mindset are operating every day. And so what can you do about that? Sort of those real action steps of what does this mean? It means that if you are able to, sort of in your sort of space and bandwidth and in your position, be proactive about reaching out to employees. Don't rely on them to sort of be able to sort of think outside of their tunnel and look for additional help. Really sort of be proactive and sort of take that first step, instead of waiting for employees to reach out asking for help. And then similarly, make it as easy as possible for your employees to actually follow the guidance, advice, recommendations that you might be communicating to them. And whether that means talking to their loan providers, like Tim talked about, like, recommending that they sort of keep in contact with them, whether it means setting up that split direct deposit that Tim also mentioned, or going and talking to, the financial expert that maybe can help make some of the recommendations for them. Anything that requires a lot of extra action on the end of the employee is going to be tough. And so just make sure that you as the employer are really setting them up to make this as easy as possible. Similar for like the process of getting cash benefits for some of this wellness stuff that Matt was talking about, making sure that it's a really low bar and low hurdle to get access and enroll in those programs, because it's just tough to move through the world when you're operating in this scarce mindset. And then the last thing that I would say to really kind of remember in all communications with your employees, particularly with a scarce mindset, is that they have very limited attention because of this sort of tunneling and this bandwidth tax. And so think about this. There's a 3-second rule, basically, which is that you have 3 seconds to communicate to someone what it is that you want them to do. And like how they can do it. And so if you're sending communications out to your employees that give recommendations, they should be able to look at that email and in 3 seconds understand what the recommendation is, what the move is that they're supposed to make. Because otherwise, if it takes longer than that for them to sort of digest and understand that, you've lost them.
Great. And so I just wanted to call out, we have 6 or 7 minutes left of Q&A, and so we have time for 2 audience questions. I'll ask each of the panelists to spend about a minute on each. So we have Sid Paia, I believe if the pronunciation is wrong, I apologize, from the Sunny Day Fund, who asked, what is BlackRock doing to foster innovation at the earliest stages beyond supporting established incumbents? So the order will go is Tim, Matt, Marielle for each of these, just so we can rattle off.
I can dive in there quickly and say that I think we are probably only qualified to answer what the Emergency Savings Initiative is doing around that. And I think the answer is that we're both trying to encourage and really support large actors who can make emergency savings possible for large numbers of customers or employees. And we're testing and learning new ideas and interventions. At least speaking for myself, and my colleagues can weigh in here, we think about that less as testing a particular vendor or a particular incumbent, and more about testing ideas or concepts that we hope will have broad applicability. And I think we have a pretty open appetite to hear from innovators who see new ideas in making savings, especially liquid savings, emergency savings, possible. Come and talk to us. We would love to find a way to test those ideas. That's part of our mandate.
Yeah, I would just add to Tim's point. I mean, the reason it's an initiative is because no one has solved this yet. And I think we're all working together to try to figure out not just what works, but who is out there also doing this type of work, and how do we learn from each other and grow the opportunities to make this more of a reality for more workers.
Yep, and as Tim also mentioned, we have a whole component of our work stream that really is focused on sort of testing and learning and helping sort of understand potential solutions that could then eventually go to scale and be really meaningful. And so that is very much sort of looking at the beginning of a process, and how do we make it better? How do we make it easier? How do we solve for these real significant challenges that households are facing?
And then the last question for the panel, sort of merging several, but calling out Eric King at Opportune and Sylvia Walker, see you. And there were several others as well, but looking for one final recommendation that each of you would like to share for how employers and other institutions can leverage this moment for the longer term benefit of their employees' financial security. So looking at things that can implement quickly, but also have longer term benefit.
I'll start, but I think, well, we spent a lot of time today talking about ways to tactically and practically sort of improve opportunities for savings. I think the most important thing employers can do is just let your people know you care about them and that you're thinking about them. And to me, that is that should not get lost in the noise and the chaos that's ensuing around us. And to me, that's the most practical and important thing an employer can do, in addition to supporting these key benefit initiatives.
Yeah, so in addition to that, I'd say that another really quick tool strategy is going back to something that Tim called out earlier, which is that split direct deposit, right? So 62% of you, as mentioned, have the capability of doing that. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It is a simple, redesign of the form, recommendations, getting it back in front of people, and sort of even giving, small anchor points on what they might think about putting into a liquid savings account. And it's a tool that most of you already even have. So that would be sort of my big push is think about how to get that in front of people in a way to, to go ahead and sign up for it, because sign up for it now when motivation is still high to be building that emergency savings. And then the beautiful thing is that because it's similar to retirement savings, it is a sort of ongoing automatic process, which means that even then in the recovery, and if you do it, particularly if you split it as a percent of earnings, when hours and earnings are able to go back up, that means that savings contributions will also increase over time. So.
Well, you guys hit both of the things I was going to say, so I'll just offer this. I would just say whatever your normal is for what you are able to do with and for your workforce, kick it up a little bit. And I don't necessarily mean spend more money, although if you're able to do that, of course, that will be noted. But take a little bit of a chance, that this is a moment when I think we're in such extraordinary circumstances and the pain level is so high that we'll be more forgiving if we don't get it 100% right. And if you're able to, send that email that maybe you would have had 3 rounds of discussions about whether that's your role and it makes sense, just go ahead and do it. And sometimes you get it wrong, but the upside, I think Matt hit so well, done right, your workers are going to go, they're trying. And that in and of itself is a revolution if we can get to a place where there's a broad understanding that your employer has your short-term and your long-term financial well-being in mind. That's the basis, because we're not going to have all the right prescriptions. Some of them we do. I'll, +1 on split direct deposit. But to have a shift in terms of what employees see as a reasonable expectation of their employer and what they can trust from their employer, and having employers see that they did this and it paid off in terms of what sort of feedback they got, that would be something that we can all walk away from this with.
Great. So thank you all so much for your insights. Again, I personally learned a lot, and I hope that folks on the call did as well. So we're at the portion of the program where we're wrapping up. Feels like we just begun and there's so much more to talk through, but we've got 5 minutes left. So I will hit some of the key takeaways that we heard in this, and then we'll wrap up. So 1, employers and financial institutions have a critical role in this pivotal moment, right? And we started with how important this influx will be for many folks, and employers have some very clear roles to play. 2, workers that are still employed and whose families are healthy are looking for ways to feel secure financially and psychologically, right? And there are immediate, straightforward strategies that employers can implement. We hit on some, and in summary, I think everyone did a great job of driving that particular point home. And 3, this moment, for all the stresses and real hardship that it causes, is also an opportunity to think longer term and set up an emergency savings solution structure for employees, for future stimulus payments, and other windfalls. Again, we don't know what will happen with that, but this is a critical moment. So first, I want to thank everybody who's listening and everybody who will listen to the recording, and thank our panelists, Tim Fleck from Commonwealth, Mario Beasley from Common Sense Lab and the Center for Advanced Hindsight, and Matt Ball, who's the Vice President of Workplace Financial Health at the Financial Health Network. So first, wanted to thank the 3 of you for your insights. and for participating in this panel, which again is the second in BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative, the webinar series on the financial economic impacts of COVID-19, focused on how employers can support their employees in best using the stimulus payments and potentially encouraging savings for them as well. We will be sharing a recording of this, so if you'd like to share that out or listen again, you are welcome to do that. We will also have the key takeaways and a brief summary in writing if you'd like to share that out. And we will also have some upcoming webinars on a variety of topics. So we will include that in the follow-up, and we will cover a range of topics because, you know, there's a lot to cover, but don't expect that this crisis will hit anytime sooner. These issues will stay relevant. So we'll continue to have these webinars. Again, we sort of thank everybody who listened, and thanks to the panelists for sharing your knowledge. And that's what we've got. So have a good day, everybody, and thanks for listening.